Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki spoke Wednesday to the UN General Assembly. It was something like watching a dead government walking, given the number of people predicting the demise of the Maliki government. But Maliki presented a positive picture, speaking of the successes of the new Iraq.
Today, in Iraq, the new Iraq, there are hundreds of parties that are active within 20 political alliances. There are more than 6,000 civil organizations, hundreds of newspapers and magazines, 40 local and satellite TV stations, as well as the offices of the foreign media correspondents from all over the world that are work without conditions, without restrictions.
Joining me to analyze Maliki's speech from Istanbul is Joost Hiltermann, Deputy Program Director for the Middle East with International Crisis Group. So Joost, the Prime Minister of Iraq says the situation is succeeding, at least at the political level. He talks about democratic rights. I think some journalists might wonder about just how little preconditions there are working in a place where so many of them have been killed. But at any rate, what do you make of Maliki's comments?
Well, you know, he's doing a number of things. He's really a salesman who has very little to sell. He has no progress to show on the political front. So he's saying, for example, that Iraq is being attacked by terrorists, and that this puts us in the same position as the United States and other Western countries in the fight against terror, and therefore we deserve your support. He's also claiming credit for things that he in fact did not do. For example, he is saying that we accomplished a split between Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Sunni tribal leaders. Of course, the Sunni tribal leaders didn't do this out of a desire to bring about national reconciliation in response to a government effort in this direction, but because these tribal leaders were suffering under Al-Qaeda in Iraq and had some of their leaders killed by this organization and were taking revenge. And thirdly, Prime Minister Maliki is taking credit and is basically saying that progress is being made on national reconciliation, and he cited a number of examples, for example, the oil law and the effort to reverse de-Ba'athification. But in fact, nothing has happened, nothing concrete anyway. No decisions have been taken. We've seen no real progress.
In Maliki's speech, he says the enemy is terrorism, echoing the kind of language we hear from the Bush administration. Terrorism is a tactic. Maliki doesn't tell us who is actually fighting, and he also doesn't tell us what they're fighting for, except to suggest they're fighting against the democratic values of a democratically elected Iraqi government, free speech. The fact that people are fighting for control of oil doesn't enter the picture here. Who are the players, and what are they really fighting for?
Well, there is a broad array of violent actors in Iraq. Keep in mind that the United States and its allies that came into Iraq in April 2003 created a huge vacuum, a security vacuum, a managerial vacuum, and a political vacuum that until today have not been filled. Clearly, U.S. forces have not been able to fill that vacuum. They have been incapable of restoring law and order. The governments that were appointed and then elected have been unable to govern and have not filled that vacuum. And through the de-Ba'athification law, the managerial class was essentially decapitated. And so in this vacuum, a number of violent actors have stepped, and they are fighting for any number of issues, for power, for access to resources such as oil, of course, which is Iraq's main source of income, and at the local level for all kinds of reasons that lead to a number of conflicts that are both simultaneous and intersecting. They are sometimes of a sectarian nature, sometimes of an ethnic nature, sometimes of a tribal nature. There's a huge problem with crime mafias operating that are kidnapping people for ransom. And so it's a total free-for-all, frankly. And so when Prime Minister Maliki is talking about the country being buffeted by groups that are using terror as a method, he's talking about any number of actors. And in fact, he could include his own government, because The government is supported by militias that essentially are uncontrolled and that have been involved in death squad activity and have committed other atrocities against certain population groups.
Have things changed on the ground as a result of the surge, and if they've changed, have they changed for the better?
Well, things have changed, and they have changed for the better, and this has to be acknowledged, I think. But I will attach an important caveat to that. But things have changed in that in Baghdad and in some of the other areas of mixed population, and keep in mind that Iraq, most populated areas are in fact of mixed population. The most violent actors have been temporarily suppressed or relocated, dislocated, whatever. They are no longer there. They have moved on to other areas where the American forces are not present. And so this surge is essentially a temporary phenomenon. And if it isn't accompanied by a serious effort to bring about a political deal or a new national compact, for example, that would bring all the various political actors together in some kind of common understanding, then I think the surge will peter out, and whatever gains have been made militarily will essentially be in vain, and we will see a reversal to the sectarian and other violence that we saw in the past year.
Given that the U.S. has so much to say in the outcome, there's a debate taking place in Washington. Some people advocating a partitioned Iraq, some people a loose federation. Others are saying, no, you should fight for a strong central state in Iraq. How is this going to play out, and what do Iraqis want?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that no solution can be imposed on Iraq at this point. Iraq is headed towards being a failed state, much like Somalia was a failed state. And you cannot impose partition on Iraq. It's an absurd notion. Loose federation, yes, between the Kurds and everybody else, but there's nothing you can do about the everybody else. And so we are now facing a situation where the question is, what good do American forces still play? Is it useful for them to stay? And if they stay, and what kind of posture should they assume? Are they still playing a positive role? Have they ever played a positive role? Could they still play a positive role? Or is it better that they leave? There's also the issue of American domestic interests. The military is severely overstretched and cannot sustain a prolonged American military presence in Iraq. So all of these questions are now being debated, and there are no easy answers, given the fact that Iraq is headed toward total disaster.